Episode 8 of Season 6 of The Handmaid's Tale stands out as the most revealing and engaging installment of the season so far. If you've ever witnessed a session of General Conference, the semi-annual global gathering of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you'll notice a striking visual hierarchy. Dominating the stage are mostly older white men seated in deep red wingback chairs that resemble royal thrones. Their attire is uniform, dark, tailored suits in black, gray, or navy, always worn over crisp white shirts. The only hint of personal expression is their tie, neatly knotted and modest, conservatively colorful. They are clean-shaven and their hair is immaculately styled, stiff with product, each strand in its proper place. Off to the side sit the women of perceived authority. Their roles are often inherited through legacy or secured by proximity to male power. Their clothing is reminiscent of the commander's wives in The Handmaid's Tale. Flowing skirts that fall just below the knee, blouses with billowing sleeves gathered at the shoulders, and collars buttoned high to eliminate any suggestion of a neckline. Their hairstyles, preserved with shellac, seem frozen in a late 1990s journalistic aesthetic, rigid and composed, as if to guard against the accidental intimacy of a stray bang falling across an eye. Even their more vibrant clothing, a brightly colored jacket over a black skirt, conforms. The skirts skim over opaque black tights, ending just above the ankle, making room for practicality without ever inviting attention. And where do we find the Marthas in this system? Look no further than the senior missionaries, often introduced not by their own names or merits, but as the wife of the mission president. These women, many of whom have lived full, rich lives, are quietly asked to abandon the earned identity of grandmother, a role that, for those of us lucky enough to claim it, brings profound joy. The pleasure of kissing newborn cheeks, chasing toddlers through backyards, or slipping preteens forbidden fashion items their parents would never approve of, only to hand them back, full of sugar and sweets, is one of life's sweetest rewards. But senior missionary women are stripped of this chapter. Instead, they are told that managing hormone-addled 18-year-old boys with barely developed frontal lobes and a compulsive attraction to rebellion is the pinnacle of their third act. Their labor is expected to be quiet, administrative, supportive, not creative, not visionary, not sovereign, and certainly not celebrated. So, what's the message here? What does this matter? Because this echoes the theme of my podcast, the why now, the what next. Crones of the world, when do we claim our wisdom as power, not as a punchline? Yes, that is what we're going to do today. I have as my guest the wonderful, the beautiful, the amazing Beth Magnetic, and I'm going to bring her on, and we are going to talk about The Handmaid's Tale on today's episode of She Became Visible. And I think I love that I have found Beth as a fellow Handmaids person that we can talk about the episodes, because I'm new to this. I actually had never watched Handmaid's Tale for the exact reason why my daughter doesn't watch it, because it's too similar to real life. And there's a lot of other shows that I don't watch because I see a similarity between what's happening in the world right now. And I don't need a remembrance of that. So I never had watched Handmaid's Tale. There started to be so many references to it in comedy sketches, or somebody would talk about, like, for example, at the inauguration, they highlighted Ivanka's dress and said how close it was to the commander's wives. And I wasn't familiar with that. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have to watch. And then I knew season 6 was coming out. And so I thought, okay. And so I binge watched all 5 seasons for like a week, and I got caught up. And I wish that I would have watched it sooner because it wasn't as period. It wasn't as much of a period piece as I thought it was going to be. It did bother me because it replicated the fundamental religion that I had left, and I could see the similarities so strongly. And season 6, I thought the first few episodes were a little, but the last few episodes have been amazing, and the similarity is not as humorous as I found it in the first 5. It's actually frightening. So let's bring on Beth and let's talk about this. Hey, girl.
Oh, hi. I was just saying, as soon as you said that the similarity has become frightening, I got goosebumps because I'm right there with you. Like it used to be like, oh, that's so interesting. It's like
Yeah.
in our age, and then I actually, as the current administration has taken over, it's
Yeah.
eerie
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
spot on it is.
And that's a really good point, Beth, because I do think the current administration with the Christian national movement and the masculine movement, which I love Scott Galloway because he is such a defender of young men. And yet he talks about how masculinity is being defined by this current administration as crass and angry and violent. And there's such a difference between how I thought of masculinity, how my boys were raised, and how my husband exhibits masculinity to what I see out there as what used to be considered bad boy and stay away. And now it's like, this is what you want.
I only have one son and he's developmentally disabled. I've never been so grateful that I have a son that is not going to comprehend the manosphere. He's not going to grow up to be what the alt-right controlled social media would want to craft him into being.
Beth, and we'll talk about your nonprofit and what you're doing, but just to echo what you're saying, I have said in the last 2 or 3 months, I'm so glad my son died. I mean, that is an obscene thing to say, but as I watched Medicaid taken away, which
Mhm.
he was on,
Mhm.
as I watch the health services being taken away, which it was very hard to find because of his disabilities, and you had to find a specialist, and they only take so many, and do you accept Medicaid? And I also just see what's going on as far as just the care of anyone that doesn't have millions and billions of dollars. I thought, wow, he left this world just in time. And that's
Absolutely.
insane to say. So let me just take a second and introduce you because I haven't done that yet. So you are the creator of Death by Patriarchy, and I want you to talk about that. And then you are the co-host of Under Her Eye, which I want you to talk about that, where she dissects the systems that keep women small, especially those rooted in high demand religion. As a former Mormon turned activist and true crime researcher, which is how I found you originally, was your true Mormon crime, you are bringing a sharp eye to the eerie parallels between Mormon history and the dystopian world of The Handmaid's Tale, because fiction is often a small step away from fact. And it is, I mean, someone posted the other day a old clip from Twilight Zone back in the
Mhm.
60s, and it was the ghost of Hitler,
Yeah.
and his voice was talking to this new person, and everything he was, and I've watched so many Twilight Zone episodes that are so relatable to what's going on today: bomb shelters, hiding things and getting violent with your neighbors, the division in the neighborhoods because of different, conspiracy theories and things like that. Would you say you started out with true Mormon crime? Was that
Yeah.
your first podcast?
So I have a season of Mormon true crime that's you can find it here on YouTube on my channel, or you can find it on any podcasting platform. But what happened was I was researching to do another season of Mormon true crime. I ended up coming across a case of a man named Kit Arthur. And Kit Arthur, he is in prison now. He has been convicted, but his wife's ex-husband fought for years to expose this guy, and he was teaching people how to make IEDs at home to put around the perimeter of your house, how to set up your house so that you could take out a SWAT team. He was teaching people how to build homemade landmines. He was teaching people who to kidnap in your local community if you have a tyrannical local government, and how to torture them so
Mm.
that you can overthrow your local government. He was Mormon. But this ended up leading me down this rabbit hole where I started to realize that the strangest and most bizarre Mormon cases are not necessarily only religiously radical, they're politically radical. And so I ended up identifying really that Mormonism, the thing that makes it that so that we have so many weird Mormon crimes is the fact that Mormonism and its theology is designed really to make Christian nationalists. And so I ended up discovering and uncovering this, and it sent me down this whole like catastrophic rabbit hole, really, to start to realize how bad Christian nationalism is and how dangerous it is. And then all of a sudden, the whole world exploded with it, like immediately after I had this realization. And so I am preparing to start doing some conversations with Joe Rollins. He is the first herald of the Church of Korihor.
Uh-huh.
But we're going to be talking specifically about Christian nationalism. I
Oh,
also have some episodes of, so it's a Mormon believing family. The Judds, they released a series here on YouTube called The Crazy Train. And it's really the story of a wealthy Mormon family losing their privilege and experiencing poverty and the loss of privilege, and how their Mormon community treated them and the horrific things that happened to them once they lost their status.
oh my gosh. I can't wait. That is always a rebuttal. Whenever you bring up crime that's been committed by Mormons, you're always going to hear, well, other people, I mean, nobody says, hey,
Yeah.
what religion was he? We're like,
John Wayne Gacy.
yes, there you go. It's like, I don't know,
I think
but
he was Baptist. I want
yeah,
to
but
say
I don't even think I don't think his religion
influenced it.
yes, influenced
Mhm.
the craziness and the killings. But when you go back to the Bundys and everything that's going on right now with Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt and Ted Bundy, and you start going through the list of the kid that was kidnapped that his family tried to sneak him over.
Blaze
Yes,
Thibodeau. Mhm.
yes. I mean, there's too much. There's too many.
Yeah.
And then you go back through like Lori Vallow, and then you find out that her dad was a cuckoo who didn't think anybody
Mhm.
should have to pay taxes. And that's what those kids
Mhm.
were raised in. And so there is something about the doctrine, the teachings. And I think it goes back to Joseph Smith with his, well, there are some rules that we don't really have to follow because God's rules are higher than man's rules. And just that statement right there, I don't think I've ever heard a Catholic say that God's rules are better than man's rules. Therefore, we're going to start breaking all of God's rules. I mean, I don't remember, I could be wrong. Somebody that's, stringent Catholic can correct me on that. But
Certainly, like back in the conquests and
yeah,
the
Spanish
Inquisitions, sure, but
doors, yeah.
in the modern age, in the last 200, 300 years, I mean, they did some horrific things. I won't
And there's
I won't give them a huge
protecting and
pass,
there's
but
taking God's word to a crazy level, where you're
yes.
kidnapping and murdering and stuff, but it doesn't seem to be as like a totally new idea. Like, "Oh, I've got a great idea.
No,
Let's
no.
all, not pay our taxes. Let's all move to Idaho. Let's move to Missouri, take over land that isn't ours, claim it to be our." Well, that's kinda what's going on right now. But you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like another fundamental
So
religion.
that's exactly what I ended up uncovering is that as soon as I had that lens of, "Oh my god, it isn't Mormonism, it's Christian nationalism,"
Christian national, yeah.
that's dangerous. All of a sudden I was like, "Damn, I have to change my podcast." So anyways, it's
Get a
Death
new
by
name.
Patriarchy. Yes. So changing it to Death by Patriarchy and discussing really specifically Christian nationalism because
Yeah.
Christian nationalism is terrifying.
It really is. It really is. And what's I think the scariest part about it is when people reference it during the elections and they would warn people, "Oh, you don't know what's coming. There is a playbook that Trump is following." And it's called Project 2025. And I would get responses if I would say something like that. And the responses would be, he said he didn't do it. He said he doesn't even know what it is. He has nothing to do with Project 2025.
And
And
here's
now, yeah, as that's all unfolding, I'm like,
uh-huh.
what do you think now?
Just a
What
pure coincidence that 42% of Project 2025 has been done to the letter
yeah,
so far.
yeah,
Just coincidence.
just happens, yeah. And that the people, Voight and and Stephen Miller and all these people that were also involved, that they happened to
Right.
be part of his
On
cabinet,
his
you know?
cabinet.
Yeah, so that's the scary
Exactly.
part, because when you do see this, and I found this, what did my daughter show me the other day? When my mother moved to Utah, people, I want you to listen to this. When my mother moved to Utah, she was in her late 80s. Okay. She's lived in Illinois, Missouri, California, Oregon, and Washington, and moved to Utah. Utah is the only state where she tried to change over her driver's license, and they demanded to have a copy of her marriage license to prove that her maiden name used to be Regan, but it was changed to Cathcart, and this was the piece of paper showing this. And I said, I've never had to do that. I have an old driver's license from Washington State. We moved to Arizona. They go, oh, clickety click. Here's your new Arizona license. I mean, I've been married for 50 freaking years. I don't know where my marriage license is. It took my cousin months to finally get a copy of her marriage license. Now, what does that tell you? That's exactly what they're trying to
Yep.
implement throughout the entire United States to prevent women from voting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so systematic, and this is one of the things that I was trying to wake people up to from Project 2025, is that it says, not in these exact words, but it ultimately says that single moms are the worst and most dangerous thing to happen to America. And
Yeah.
so they're doing everything that they can to make it extremely uncomfortable for single moms. So they're stripping away any services to help our kids. They're stripping away any services to help us. They're literally trying to force us into situations where we will just marry any man to make all of these financial problems that they're creating for us go away. It's been really interesting looking at what have they been repealing? SNAP. Who probably
Oh,
benefits from that more than
yeah.
anyone? Single moms, right? They're taking away Medicaid. Kids who moms do not have the education, qualification, career backgrounds to be able to have jobs that provide insurance benefit from Medicaid. And then you look at step by step every single thing they're doing. Okay, we're your household only makes this much money. Well, your taxes are going up. But
Yeah.
if you go get married, hey, guess what? Your taxes will go down. Not
Yeah.
only because you are going to be able to file married, but because your household income will move your tax bracket to a tax bracket that will decrease
Yeah.
your taxes. So
Yeah.
it's wild once you look at it that way. They're literally just trying to make it so that women will marry the horrible men that they have been brainwashing.
Yeah, it's so true. And it follows the pattern. Now tell me, because I asked you, and I did not know. I've watched a few interviews with Margaret Atwood, but you told me that you actually heard that part of her research for writing the book was looking into Mormonism. So tell
Mhm.
everybody about that.
For context, for anybody who doesn't know, there is nothing in A Handmaid's Tale that it's not represented in history somewhere in the world.
Yes, it
So
has to be precedented. I remember her saying that. Yeah.
every single thing in it has happened somewhere at some point. And that goes for the book. And they continued that theme with the show. So nothing in the show that's different from the book hasn't actually happened somewhere. So somewhere before now, before Adriana Smith, we've had women who were brain dead, who were being used as incubators for babies.
And that's a whole story on its own, because the
Mhm.
fact that this baby is very high risk of being very disabled and
And the
have
state
major
of Georgia
problems.
is not going to take care of a disabled baby. They're ripping the services away to take care of the disabled children. The whole thing is horrific. But one of the places that Margaret Atwood looked was to Mormonism. She talks about the FLDS, but she talks about really studying the history of Mormonism as part of this as well. And so if you look at A Handmaid's Tale, one of the things that really stands out to me, Gilead is a isolated theocratic state. And
Mm,
so we see that in historic Mormonism, where they wanted to get away with polygamy. They wanted to get away with, let's call it what it is, communism. They say united order, but they wanted to get away with everybody having to give all of their money and things to Brigham Young, and then Brigham could take whatever he wanted,
right.
and then the higher ups could take whatever they wanted, and then everybody else just had to survive. You can see all of that playing out in Gilead as well as Deseret. And so you can also see just culturally this submission of women in Mormonism that you see among the different classes in A Handmaid's Tale. So there's a lot there, but I know that you, Rene, you mentioned, like you texted me, you're like, oh my goodness, am I crazy? Like I'm watching this and I see Mormonism all
Yeah.
throughout this.
Right. Well, and
Mhm.
and I see it because of the different levels of the different job descriptions of the women that were there. And
Mhm.
I recognize that as very easily describable in the Mormon church, how there is a congregational level of women. And then it branches out into, because for those, if anybody's watching that's not Mormon, and I love this because it's so East Coast. So rather than calling it a congregation, it's called a ward, which is very familiar with people that live in at the East Coast where things were parishes or wards or things like that. So it's such a takeover from the people moving, west. So it's called a ward. And then there is a hierarchy in the ward where you have a bishop and then he has counselors. And then there are different people put into positions to take over the different auxiliaries. Like you have a young men's program and a young women's program and the primary, which is children that are, 3 to 12 years old. So there's teachers and there's leaders and there's all these people that are considered lay workers because nobody gets a paycheck, but they're worked to death. So you see those people. And then above those, you have so many wards. They put the wards together and they call it a stake. And then you have a stake president and stake counselors and stake authorities that are over these different auxiliaries. And then you have commanders in Salt Lake or the 70s that are over all of those people. So the hierarchy is exactly the same
Mhm.
as it is, in the Mormon church. And what I found, let me read this to you because I had to look it up because when I was thinking about the different jobs, I had forgotten about the ants. Like I knew about, or the aunts. I knew about the Marthas, and I thought, clever name. I love that. I always hated that story of Mary and Martha. I always
Mhm.
hated that Martha is working her butt off and she's trying to get ready for this stupid party. And Mary's there, oh, tell me more at Jesus's feet. And Martha's like, excuse me, I could use a little help, And then the scripture is, how dare you? Look at, she's learning it. And I'm like, no, that's not.
Mhm.
I always hated that story. So I love that they call them the Marthas. But you've got the Marthas, you've got the handmaidens, and then you've got the aunts. And I had forgotten about the aunts. So let me read this to you. So the aunts, particularly Aunt Lydia, are responsible for the re-education of handmaids at centers like the Red Center, where they are taught to accept their roles and suppress individuality. Now, where would you find the aunts in a typical Mormon ward?
Like Young Women's, where they're there to train you up to be a handmaid ultimately. They're
Yeah.
there to train you to be submissive, to dress appropriately, to say all the right things and behave all the right ways so that you will fall in line and reproduce.
Exactly. I mean, I did not experience some of the things that I've seen, but when people talked about having a time in Young Women's where everyone was told to bring a white temple dress, pretend like this was, getting ready for your wedding and this kind of stuff, or to
Mhm.
make vision boards of your wedding. And I'm like, I don't remember ever doing that. But, I think I was primarily raised in the 60s when the church was just, flourishing because everything was post World War II and baby boomers were doing great. And the church was spreading. And so there wasn't as much of that. I didn't feel as though. And when I was in the Young Women's presidency, I remember teaching and I would go, oh yeah, I'm not saying that. We're not talking about that today. Cross. But there was no discussion of, have you gotten all of your paperwork done to apply for college?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I
somebody would go
remember
off to school at 18 and they would come back engaged at Christmas and people would go, oh yes, that's so great. But yeah, you're younger. So tell me what you experienced.
as a young member of the Young Women's presidency, I did teach the cupcake lesson.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh. So
Which is,
I
tell everybody, and just in case, I'm sure
so
but maybe
the
not.
the concept is you're teaching about the law of chastity, so not having relations before marriage. You hold up a cupcake and then you lick the cupcake and then you ask anybody if they want it, because who would want a licked cupcake? And so it's this concept to tell girls that they are dirty and bad and nobody will want them if they are not a virgin when they get
Yeah.
married. I totally did the pictures in the dress with the temple backdrop. I totally did the writing a list of all of the qualities I wanted in my husband. It's important to note that like none of the qualities had anything to do with anything substantial. It was all, he's a returned missionary. He's loyal to the church. He's a worthy priesthood holder. He'll take me to the temple. Like, so everything about the man that I was supposed to want was designed around Mormonism. It was not designed around me or my personality. It wasn't like, oh, he's going to be a nerd and he's going to have a very particular sense of, no, none of that mattered. What mattered was he could take me to the temple, because any good man and any good woman can make it work.
Exactly. And I heard that the other day, somebody referenced that. And I did grow up with Spencer Kimball as a prophet. I was not quite married yet, but that was a big thing, was if you don't need to each, you both can't be pickleball lovers. If one of you doesn't like pickleball, it's okay. You can still, have a fabulous wedding and marriage because you both are members of the church and you obey your temple covenants. And it was indoctrinated to think that, and if you can't, then you are selfish, because you're not serving the other person. You're thinking of only of yourself. And that was, Spencer Kimball had a lot of damaging thoughts on the whole togetherness thing, which makes me wonder what his marriage was like. And this is the scary part. And this is, again, not knowing anything about Catholicism, but I feel as though, yes, there are things that have changed. We don't do the masses maybe in Latin. Now they're doing the mass in English. I know a lot of people freaked out over something like that. And there were some things that Pope Francis, said that people didn't necessarily like, but the doctrine never really changed. It's like, well, let's just love everybody. And people go, we can't love gay people, but he didn't do anything. He didn't change any doctrine that said, but I just feel like if the new person that comes in, the new General Young Women's Presidency in Salt Lake, decides that this is going to be their new thing. Remember when they went out, because I older, you were probably like the age of my laurels when I was in there, but they had the little ribbons and they had the beads and they had all that stuff, and they had the personal progress program, and they had every little, and then they decided, we don't want to do that anymore. We're not going to do that anymore. That's not good. And then, like you say, they come out with the strength of youth, and we're not going to do that anymore. Wait, change our minds. That's okay. We're going to do a whole new program. Constant flipping. Anybody that's been in the church for longer than 5 years is like, oh, wait, what are we doing now? I'm sorry. I don't believe that anymore. Got it. Okay. And what again do I believe? Got it. Okay. I got that,
I think that's so interesting when I hear the Mormon podcasters and content creators now, and they talk like there was never any doctrine ever that said that there would be polygamy in heaven.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's the entire thing. And women grieved for generations about the fact that we would die and have to go practice polygamy, and we didn't want to.
Yeah. Tell Carolyn Pearson that. Let's see how she reacts to that.
Right.
I just made a comment on good old, I don't know, what's her name, Justine or something. She's the apologist for the church. And she said something about, she's talking about the temple ceremony and the new garments. And she said, the garments are, you're bathing yourself in the veil of Jesus. And I'm like, when did that come? What? I was a temple worker. I don't remember saying anything about a veil of Jesus. And so I looked it up, and it was like, okay, wait a minute here. I got to look this up, because I don't remember anybody ever saying anything about that. Let's see. I can't find it, but it was like, you've now put on your garments. The garments are a symbol of the skins of the animals that were given to Adam and Eve when they left the Garden of Eden. And they are a protection from the adversary, the power of the priesthood.
Did they say that in the past?
Yes, it was something like, where I wish I could find it. It said, brother so-and-so, under proper authority, the garment placed upon you is now authorized for and in behalf of whoever they're doing the work for. Then officiator would repeat the name of the person who is dead and is to be worn throughout your life. It represents the garment given to Adam and Eve when found in the Garden of Eden, and is called the garment of the holy priesthood. Inasmuch as you do not defile, but are true and faithful to your covenants, it will be a shield and a protection to you against the power of the destroyer, and you have finished your work when you have finished your work on the earth.
Totally not magic underwear. Totally not.
But the thing was, it was a remembrance of the covenants that you were taking, and that, and I always thought of it like, well, yeah, it is kind of a protection, because the chances of you cheating, with these ugly garments on underneath your clothes,
are probably less than if you had some fabulous Victoria's Secret underwear on. So, I always looked at it like that. I was like, yeah, it's going to make you wear modest clothes, and that's going to keep you a little bit more modest and humble, and that would probably help you. But I never thought of it as my mom was taught that, like, if you had your garments on and you were working with a table saw and the saw slipped and went into your thigh, that the garments would protect you from being cut. And that's how her generation was taught. I was never really taught that, because I would say to her, Mom, what about those people that got blown up on the airplane?
My stepdad cut into his leg with a chainsaw, and it was an inch below the garment line. And so it was just proof,
Wow.
So I don't think I've told you my garment story, Renee.
No.
So I put my garments on and I was like instantly like, oh my goodness, yes, this is so wonderful. Like, I'm protected from Satan. I'll never have sleep paralysis again, that type of thing. And so I actually started to feel very depressed wearing these, putting them on every day. I started to feel really bad about my body. Then I went to therapy for the first time when I was pregnant and right after I had my daughter. And the therapist had me read a book called Toxic Parents.
Ooh.
And so it's a book about recovering from abuse. And there's a chapter where they broke down in very clear detail what the signs of that you're being abused are. And so in this chapter, it said an abuser will control their victim control what their victim wears down to the underwear that they allow them to wear. And I literally burst out laughing. I was like, oh my God. So if the church was a person, they'd be an abuser. And I could not handle that cognitive dissonance. So I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. And then a little time passed. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, if the church was a person,
yes,
they'd be an abuser.
Yes, they'd be the abusive boyfriend. I've always referenced that. They are the typical abusive boyfriend. Yeah.
Yes.
And you know what's funny about that? In the episode 8, when it starts out, they're swirling the cloth in this red dye. And they're talking about how they controlled their clothing and the colors of their clothing. And, what red represented, and how all the commanders' wives are in green and all the Marthas are in gray. And so I thought, yep, they're controlling your clothing.
Yeah. So I actually pulled a couple of the lines from that portion.
Yeah.
So June says, they wanted us to look like we'd been dipped in blood, some fairy tale figure in a red cloak. They used our clothes to divide us, to dehumanize us. But tonight, those robes will be our weapons.
And isn't that exactly right? To dehumanize you, to judge you. I mean, how many times? Now that I live in Utah part of the year, I see people all the time. The first thing I do is check for the circle, the smile, on the neck, or the cap sleeve. And, and it's just because Utah is getting a little bit more diverse. There are more non-Mormons moving in. I see a lot of tattoos. I'm like, good job.
Yeah.
But I look for those when we go to different events, and it always has been a symbol of your purity and your righteousness if you have on the clothing, or you could see the garments underneath the clothes. I don't know what these new girls are going to judge each other on now that they've got sleeveless garments. I have to find something else, dang it. It's so explicit. I love that. Let me show a clip of some of the scenes from I think these are from 8. Let me show this one real quick. There you go.
They dictated what we were, who we could be. They used our clothes to divide us, to dehumanize us. But tonight, those clothes will be our weapons.
Perfect. Exactly. They use those clothes to dehumanize us. It's so true. And I find it so, I'm really having a hard time with the new garment thing, because we've traveled quite a bit. And just in reference, and I should save this for another podcast, but my granddaughter just graduated from a high school in Katy, Texas, where 33% of the high school kids are white. That's it. Huge diversity. The top 10 kids that graduated with 4.9, 4.8793760. I mean, their GPAs were crazy. They were all 7 out of the top 10 were going to the University of Texas. One was going to MIT, one was going to Stanford, one was going to Rice. They all were ethnically diverse kids.
Mm.
And the names, beautiful. And so there were a lot of Muslim women that were there in the audience. I mean, stop how gorgeous these women are. I cannot believe these faces, these beautiful cat-eyed makeup, their brown eyes, and they're beautiful. And they had on hijabs, and they had on their long, flowy clothing that went to their wrists and went to their ankles, but they were light and they were flowing, and they would put a little pearl pin that would hold the hijab in place. And I looked at that and I thought, you girls on Instagram, you new garment girlies, need to go visit these Islam women who know what their role is. And I don't agree with it. I don't think it's good. I'm not saying that, but they do. And they're not putting on see-through nude colored hijabs so that you can see their hair and going, but I have a hijab. What are you talking about? So
Right.
you can see through it. I don't know. It's not what it means. I don't know what you mean. All this crap that's going on.
I
Yeah.
think that that's one of the interesting things. So when you and I were younger in Mormonism, they told us, what clothes to wear. You had to have a higher neckline. You
Yes.
had to cover your shoulders. Your tummy certainly couldn't be showing. You had to have whatever, it
Yeah.
had to go down to your knee.
Yeah.
We couldn't have 2 sets of earrings or more.
Yes.
Absolutely no tattoos.
Yes.
You could only have natural colors of hair. You needed to dress as if you were going to be wearing garments.
Yes.
Even if you weren't wearing them yet. Then we also, like you were mentioning, in Young Women's, we would earn necklaces and jewelry and that type of thing. And so that was like an identifier. It was a form of, okay, you put this on and this tells you who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, in Handmaid's Tale, you're given that red dress, you're told what that red dress means.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that tells you how to behave, what to say, your role here.
Yeah.
And all of these things that Mormonism did for us and did to us, it told us on no uncertain terms. Do you remember, I want to say it was Jeffrey R. Holland told us that we shouldn't be wearing flip-flops or open-toed
Yes.
shoes to church?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And that went along with the denim. Some 70 or something got it in his craw that he didn't like women wearing denim at church, and gave a talk. And I don't know whether it was in conference or BYU devotional seemed to have more emphasis than. And all of a sudden wearing denim was no longer authorized where we were in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if that was everywhere, but it was like, have you worked in the nursery? Do you know what it's like to work in the nursery? You're wearing a denim jumper with a t-shirt underneath it. Okay. But yeah, little simple things like that would just get in one of these men's ideas. It's like you say, it's like the political scene right now, where just wakes up with an idea and goes, you know what? I'm going to
Let's
sign an
impose this
executive
on
order that
everyone.
you can't wear flip-flops to church anymore. And everybody goes,
Mhm.
okay, that must be from
Yes.
God. Well, so that's a big association. The roles of the women were very much, I associated the roles of the women. The biggest thing in episode 8 that got me, it was watching Nick turn and be a redcoat, on the girls, and then watching Serena Joy and the power that she was thinking. She thought, I can be the change. I'm going to be the person that changes Gilead, and we're going to get rid of the handmaidens, and we're going to start showing women respect, and I can do that. And let me show you a clip, and then let's talk about that a little bit more.
Mhm.
You've talked about having a big family. Now, of Gabriel,
Don't call her that.
that is her name.
No, it's not.
She will help us fulfill our duty to God, to bear fruit and multiply as our sacred vessel.
She's not a vessel. She's a human being.
The look on his face right there says it all. And then he goes on to scream, I am the commander.
I am a good man.
Yes, yes. She sees this and she's like, I thought you were different. I thought you told me you were different. You told me you were going to support me. You told me you were going to give me a position of authority.
I see it like he almost has the inverse of what my experience was, where I wrote down the list of all of the things that I was supposed to want in a man.
Yeah.
And he feels like, oh, I check all of those boxes. She should just want to submit to me completely. So he says, I'm a good man. Well, she says, what are you going to do to me? Are you going to cut my finger off? Are you going to beat me with a belt? Are you going to torment me, basically? And she says, I've survived all of that. I can survive you. And then he says, I'm not something to survive. I'm a good man. And then she says, you can't be a good man. You're a commander. And like, oh my God, I just got goosebumps all over at that moment. And like, exactly, a good man would never put women in these situations. A good man would never have a handmaid. A good man would never have become a leader in Gilead. A good man would have never chosen to stay in Gilead.
And Joseph tried to be that. I mean, he tried to, he didn't want a handmaiden. He would fake it, so that he didn't have to do that because he loved his wife so much. He tried that. And I don't know. What do you think? He tried to be a good man but then he would put on the facade. But was there a way of him to get out?
I mean, he got handmaids out. Why couldn't he have gotten out?
True.
But
that's true.
He does talk about the fact that if he leaves, he has war crimes he's going to be punished for.
Oh, okay.
And so there's that. So this is actually a conversation I had with Jenny Gage today. We were talking about Nick and Lawrence and the fact that they seem like such good men when you're in Gilead.
Yes.
But they are good men in Gilead, and good men in Gilead are still bad men.
That's so true. And that's what I see. I mean, when I would go back and I would make comments about different bishops that we had and how they treated me, talked to me when I was in a position, like when I was young, primary president or stake young women's president. And I would go to the stake president and I'd say, I'm really having a hard time with this one ward. She literally is rebellious. I mean, like you can tell she hates my guts. She's like sitting on the front row, like this. And he'd go, yeah, there's nothing really I can do about that. That's just something you're going to have to work on. And I'm like, but everybody would say, oh, he was such a good man. And I'm like, was he? I mean, was he really? And then, I mean, I've had bishops that you see outside of church, and I saw a completely different personality outside of church than what I saw inside of church. I also see good men who are good they are good basically. But if it came down to, do I do you or do I do my calling? Yep. I'm going to do my calling. Yep. And even the families, the mothers that I see, there was a bishop when we used to live in Oregon. There was a bishop that literally was having a nervous breakdown. He had like 5 kids. He had a really demanding job. He was the bishop. He's going nuts. His wife is going nuts, I don't remember if he actually asked to be released. I want to think he did. But even that, in that case, you still left your house and went to your calling, to do your calling, because you felt you were made to feel so guilty, about that. So I don't know if you can be a good man.
I think of, we were talking earlier about Deseret versus Gilead and how there's just so much overlap between when you have an isolated theocratic state. Could there be good men in Deseret? There might be men who were better than other men in Deseret, but I will say that like once you get there, it's really hard to get out, which very similar to Gilead.
Yep.
But any man who is there confining a woman to a role, who was forcing women into polygamy, any man who was upholding that system, it does not matter how kind of a man he may have seemed to be, he's not a good man.
Yeah, that's so
good
true.
men would fight the systems. Yeah. That's been one of the most like disheartening parts of all of this, has been identifying people in my life who seem like kind people, but can they be good people if they're upholding the system?
That's a great thought process, because you're absolutely right. If in the end you will obey the commanders, in the end, just like Lawrence, like you said, you can skirt around it, you can pretend, you can do your calling halfway, and because you're going to spend time with your family. But in the end, if it came down to it, what would you choose? Mm-hmm. And most of the time, the power and authority that is given to these men is it's too good. It's just too tasty. They can't give it up. It's their complete identity. And I'm sure that's the way it is in a lot of these other. Well, I mean, you're seeing it in the Christian nationalism now. Like I said, I follow Julie Royce, and her biggest thing is to identify. She's like a floodlit for the evangelicals. So she's identifying all of these men that are being arrested for pedophilia and sex abuse and things like that. What's interesting though is that seems to be the primary thing, is the sexual abuse in the evangelical world. But I feel like in Mormonism, like you say, there's it's way more complicated. It's not just sexual abuse. It is pedophilia, crazy amount. The guys that were just arrested in Utah, the judge and the fire department chief
Yeah.
that were just arrested. But then you've got the fraud. And today I was listening to a podcast. Have you heard of the AC or AG vitamins? It's a supplement that you can get that is supposed to give you the greens, the benefits of eating your greens.
Okay.
Take a scoop and put it in your smoothie, right?
Mhm.
And I've seen it advertised a lot, and a lot of the influencers, the food nutritionists, push this. And I remember going, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna. So he's talking about how this felon from New Zealand comes to America and starts this supplemental program because America does not regulate their supplements. And I look at Utah and I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you've got Ballard that was trying to get his son-in-law's supplements in. You've got doTERRA, you've got Unique, you've got all these supplements, all the acai berry one that was big, and the Hawaiian, what's the Hawaiian Nona thing that's supposed to be a supplemental thing. And they're all in Utah because they don't regulate the supplements, and they give them a free pass because they're LDS and they're Mormons, and these people get filthy rich and then they pay their tithing. It all goes back to tithing and polygamy. Everything in the church goes back to tithing and polygamy.
It does.
So let's play another clip.
Just like Hannah. They don't get to decide who you are anymore. Okay? Go. Live your lives.
They don't get to decide who you are anymore. Go and live your lives. And that brings me to the topic. What were your feeling behind when you saw that?
Oh, I love that. I think I absolutely thought of the church instantly because they when I left the church, I remember just like being in the fetal position, like crying, like, oh my God, my entire life is a lie. And I remember going through this thought process of I identify as Mormon before I identify as Beth.
Yeah.
All of a sudden losing that and losing that portion of my identity, I had no idea who I was, how to exist, what to wear, who to talk to, who to be friends with, what to do with my life, because every ounce of everything that I had been doing my entire life, sun up to sundown, had been prescribed to me by Mormonism. As soon as I didn't have that, it's like, who am I going to be? Who do I get to be?
And this is the part that I don't understand. And once I found out truths, which I believe are truths, and I found out this system, how the system was set up and what it was doing and how it had affected my life, I no longer wanted to be associated with this system. To me, I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed that I had gone along with the ban, the priesthood ban, the temple ban, how the blacks in the priesthood were looked on. I went along with that. I lived in Vancouver, Washington, when that man was excommunicated for baptizing a black man in his swimming pool. He lived down the street from us. And I remember going, well, you got to follow the rules. Those are just the rules. And I went along with all of it. And I said to my daughter-in-law, who joined the church because they had a baby and she was raised Christian. Her dad was a pastor. And she wanted to get back into some kind of Christianity because they have a baby. And my son said to her, well, I don't know any other religion except for Mormonism. And she said, well, I'll go look into Mormonism. And so she took the discussion, she got baptized, and she would say to me something about polygamy. And I would rattle off the statements that we were taught. Well, it was just a way for the Lord to grow the church. When they moved to Utah, they really needed to increase in numbers. And it was a way to take care of the widows and all of the poor women that had lost their husbands on the trail, blah, blah, blah. I repeated all of that. I didn't know anything. I didn't look into the history. I just repeated it. So my first thing was, I need to disassociate this, just as I would if I had grown up in a family that was members of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
I would go, oh my heavens, I did not know all this. I got to get out of this system. And I don't want anyone to think that I think that way or that I go along with those beliefs. So I am out of here, you know?
Absolutely.
So it blows my mind when I see people who have done the research, but they're like, I stay because I'm 7th-generation Mormon. I stay because I think I can make a difference.
What's
And
my
I'm like,
ex-husband?
and I'm like, are you a general authority? Do you live in the conference center? Because I don't think you're going to make a difference, Serena Joy. But that's exactly what she was doing. They think they are Serena Joy, and they forgot that there is commanders in charge.
Absolutely.
And like you, I had a woman one time say to me, we're on the pickleball court, and she said something like, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but her comment was, well, you're a Mormon. And I was like, well, I'm not, but what does that mean? I don't even understand what that means, but that says exactly what I'm talking about. There is an identity that is associated with being a Mormon, and that's what people think of you. You're a racist, you're a misogynist, you have your own version of Jesus, all of the things that the church is trying to run away from. But if you call yourself a Mormon, that is what you are.
I actually had a stranger in a McDonald's at one point ask me if I was Mormon. And I was like, not anymore. And they were like, but you were. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, I could tell by the lilt of your voice.
Stop it. No. You were ordering a Big Mac in a primary voice? What?
No, just apparently just like the rhythm that I
Yes.
spoke with. They could tell.
Where was this
I was
at?
Mormon.
In Arizona?
Mesa. Yeah. Mesa, Arizona.
Stop it. Okay,
Mhm.
that's true. Okay, one of the hard times I'm having with watching The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, the Affleck guy, because he has that Mormon twang. It's
Mhm.
not even the fact that he's an idiot. It's the Mormon twang when he talks. He just has that little lip. And, you know, like
Mhm.
Jeffrey Holland, you know, it's from a certain area of Utah. When you hear it, you know, oh, you're a Mormon. You know what? Just like when I live in a very, so funny, I was looking up statistics. I live in an area of Arizona that is 97% white. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. That's why we're leaving. And I swear half of them are from Minnesota. And you can hear it when you're
Mhm.
over at the club. You can hear the twang. I'm like, you're from Minnesota, aren't you? Yeah, I know. That's what parts of the, you know, the geography that all
It's
come from. And Utah has its own twang.
Mhm. So I didn't even grow up in Utah.
Oh,
I grew up in Maine,
oh no,
and
where's your baba? Yeah,
so
yeah.
I grew up in Maine, but my mom had lived in Utah and whatnot. So I grew up being taught how to talk by her. And
Okay.
so it wasn't even like I like grew up in it.
Yeah.
It was generationally passed to me from one Mormon to the next.
Okay, you're the Baron Trump, where he has his mother's accent. It's like,
Yes,
well, he was raised by his
exactly.
mother, so you'd think he was from Sylvania. So
Right.
Sylvania, never however it
Right.
was pronounced. Yeah, that's hilarious, but it's true.
Uh-huh.
No, it is
Mhm.
because that these accents are passed down. I listened to a thing the other day where they were actually studying, and they said babies actually have different cries. If they're French babies, they have a different lilt, like you say. Spanish babies have a different cry, and it's an accent. It's learned. It is actually learned. It's so fascinating.
Wild.
I would say episode 8 was more alarming because of the similarities than any of the other episodes. This season, especially the first 5 were like, la, 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 we know what's going to happen. So let's get on with it. I wasn't, they weren't really that exciting. But this one was like, dang, you are right on. And that's It's so frightening.
It's so frightening, and it's frightening that they were recording this, a year before everything started to go crazy.
Yes. Which is
It's
that is what is so
prophetic.
weird is the prophetic and I've heard Margaret Atwood say this as well, that she did not put anything in this book that wasn't precedented. And so this behavior has happened before and it will happen again. And it is
It's
happening. Let me
happening.
show you one more clip. I hope we don't get banned because this is too good. People have to see this.
You changed. I really thought maybe that what you said was for real, and not your
Oh, I think this one is from
This
episode
is
9.
from 9. Yeah.
everything you described, your plans, your dreams, more freedom, more justice. It's just fucking talk. I still want those things. You're not going to get those things with those men in charge. Don't you see Gilead is just going to keep sending more and more men just like that? Then we will keep fighting. We won't give up.
Gilead is just going to keep and that's exactly what's happening. A combination between these, and that's so frightening from what, like you said, what we're seeing happening in our country right now. They're just going to send more, but we have to fight. We have to fight against it, and that's why I have such frustration when she finally, and like you say, that was a clip from episode 9, which is amazing. And again, it was interesting to see the two commanders, to see Nick and Lawrence and what they knew and then what they sacrificed. And I'm like, well, that says a lot.
There was also another line where they talked about the dresses. And this was towards the end of episode 8. And she said, the dress became our uniform and we became an army. So this is something that's been on my mind a whole lot, is when you look historically or in fiction or pop culture or whatever, dystopian societies, at fascist societies, when they finally start fighting back, it's because the group that's being persecuted reclaims something that was put onto them. So even the LGBTQ community in Germany, they weren't released from the concentration camps until like the 70s, but they had been labeled with the pink triangle. And so the queer community still to this day uses the pink triangle because they claimed it as their own. So I think of, as a society at this point, we haven't been handed our red dresses. But what have we been handed that we can claim, make our own, and use to fight back?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know the answer yet.
That's interesting you would say that. I was reading something today because I'm fascinated with this whole, the women that wear the uniforms that the men tell them that they have to wear. And my husband and I were in New York a while back, and we went and did a little tour of Williamsburg in the Hasidic Jewish area. And you see the mothers pushing the strollers and all the little kids and stuff like that. And I'm looking at these women and they have their heads shaven. And so they have on some kind of head covering. And I thought, man, to shave your head in compliance to some random, supposedly written down words from God. And then they have to wear the long sleeves and the long skirts. And in fact, they're even starting, they were for a while wearing, if I'm not incorrect, they were wearing tights, like leggings underneath their skirts. And now they're being told you can't do that because somehow that's considered immodest.
Too masculine.
Yeah. And so, so I'm watching them. And so I was looking something up about that. And they were saying that a lot of the clothing that the Hasidic Jews wear in America came from the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, because that's when they landed in New York and really established this Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. And so they had the turbans that was real popular in the 50s, and the little pillbox hat that Jackie O wore. So a lot of the hats look more like they also had what they used to call, and you're too young for this, but I used to have one, a dickie, which was a little thing that you would put on underneath, your to change up things, to be modest. And I thought about down east, and the little shade shirts that they had would be considered the same thing, And then they also had girdles, were very big in the 50s. In fact, when I joined the Navy, when I was getting ready to leave and go to boot camp, I was given a list of things I had to bring with me. And a girdle was one of the things I had to have. This is in 1973. I had to bring a girdle. Now, I never had to wear it. So I think it was just old, like this is what we told the women. So I had to find a girdle in 1973. But that was standard 50s. 60s, women never went outside without a girdle. And because that was just immodest to have flesh flapping around. And they also think, he goes, if you would go into any woman's drawer, there would be a slip. Women always wore slips. And that kind of took the place of the camisole and this kind of stuff that women in Victorian eras would wear. And I thought, okay, look at where the garments are. Now we're going to a slip. We're going to the biker shorts. That's your girdle. That's, it's still 50s. Like you were saying, the Christian national, everybody wants to go back to the 50s as that was some utopia time to live. And what it was women come back from the factories. We don't need you anymore. How can we make these women stay home? Oh, I know. They will tell them they need to have 50 million babies, and then they're trapped. They can't go anywhere.
Okay, so Mormonism, that
Yeah.
was one of the things when I left the church. I realized that they encourage you to get married so young and start having babies so that you're trapped in the system. That is
Yeah.
a very strategic and specific plan. I think also the 50s, like, who was it best for? Straight white men. The end.
Yeah.
Nobody else had power. And women who had the audacity to fight back, to be mouthy, to do anything but be submissive to men, they got lobotomized. They got
Yeah.
sent to institutions where they were doing MK Ultra experiments on these women. We had women who were being given they could go buy cocaine or speed or whatever else over the counter
Mhm.
and have it at home to try and cope with the fact that
Yeah.
this is not how women or humans are designed to live.
Yeah. The little pill that the Rolling Stones sing about so that you can survive. The mothers are taking the little pills so that they can survive. Absolutely true.
Mhm.
And it was for a long time, and I can't remember the era because I just read 2 books by this lady, but she talked about the truth of men being able to legally sign their women into insane asylums because
Yes.
they weren't following the rules. They didn't even need a diagnosis of any kind. It was just like, she's nuts. Get her in there. Sign away. Women had
Well, and
absolutely
say
no.
she's nuts, and then you can go be with whoever you want to be with. A
Yeah.
way for, I'd be curious to look at the rate of spousal homicide in the 50s versus now, because you could just go put them in a institute. You could go put your wife in an institution instead.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know what I associate that with? This is a far reach of an association, but I look at the men whose wives have left the church, and the men are like, "Oh, well, you've broken our temple covenants. Now we're not an eternal family. I get to divorce you, and I get to come out the winner."
That was going to be my marriage. And so I told him that I read the CES letter, and he was like, well, why would you do that? Why would you look at anti-Mormon literature? As opposed to being upset about what I had read, he was upset with me for reading it. And then, I talked to his stepmom, I talked to his family, and I remember one of them saying very specifically, like, well, you're getting divorced now. Then, like 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant.
Ah, mm-mm. You sound like Jen
So
Affleck in Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. No, that's her story. But go on. Yeah.
but yeah, we ended up staying together for another 8 years or whatever because of it.
Beth, this has just been amazing. And you guys, if you can stomach it, like I said, I have a daughter that can't watch it because, she's gone through a lot, and there's a lot of things in this that are just a little too familiar. And I had never watched it because I don't know. I just had a feeling like I thought, I don't think I'm going to want to watch this. And it wasn't what I thought, but what I feared was in
Mhm.
there. And I did see it. And I really struggle with how people can watch it and not see it as well. I really struggle. There
Don't get me
must
started on the Nick defenders. My goodness.
Okay, even after 9? What are they
Even
saying?
after
Like
9, they're
like
like,
it
"Oh, this
wasn't
was the writers ruined him. The writers, it was a complete departure from who Nick actually." I'm like, "He was a goddamn commander in Gilead. When do you admit that somebody is actually just a Yahtzee, right? Like, at what point do you admit? If it's not when they've worked themselves up the ranks and done nothing to fight back unless June asked."
First of all, A, he's a fictional character, so let's remember that. And
Mhm.
B, that's what they're saying about Elon Musk. And then you find out about what his heritage is and who his grandfather was, and you start going, "Oh, no, that was a Nazi salute. That's how
Yes.
he was raised." But they're giving him all these, well, he's autistic and, he doesn't
I'm
really.
autistic.
Yeah, he's
Come
the
on.
smartest man in the world, but he's autistic, so he does absent, weird Nazis and
I
doesn't know what he's doing.
I do weird stuff. I don't do
Yeah,
that stuff.
exactly, So
My
it's
God.
like, wow, we really do give these men grace. And
Mhm.
it's exactly what you say when we see people in the church. I mean, I've seen it so many times. In the Secret Wives of Mormon Lives, they're doing the same thing. Well, he said he was sorry. He's really trying. Jesus says to forgive. That's what one of the sisters of the girl said. Jesus said we should forgive and forget. Have you gone and talked to your bishop? Are you following the Lord's commandments? You can make this marriage work. That's what they're telling these girls. And it's like, oh, wow. This is so frightening. It's so frightening.
Girl
But
run.
Yeah, but you're right. And that was my first thing. My first thing was when June looked at Nick behind those closet doors they were hiding in, and she hears it and she looks at him. Oh, there has to be an excuse. He's a good man. He's been fighting for you. Look what he's, oh no,
Mhm.
he didn't really tell him. He just told him. I mean, that was my first reaction. Is that
Yeah,
not indoctrination?
right.
And so it's like, wow, okay.
Wow.
Well, this has been fabulous.
Thank you
When
for
the
having
series
me.
when the series ends, we might have to do this again.
Oh, I'm here for it.
But remind everybody, your Death by Patriarchy, is that going to be your primary focus right now? The other one that you're doing with Jen, correct? Is that the other one?
Yeah. So Jenny and we're doing Under Her Eye, where we're just talking about political issues or world issues or societal issues. So we do that with Julia Sanders, also
Oh,
of
yeah,
Analyzing Mormonism.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I also, my son, like I was mentioning before, he's developmentally disabled. So I am starting a nonprofit, and the nonprofit is going to focus on going into homes of families of developmentally disabled children and the families in crisis, either from like a medical issue or political issue or a mental health crisis. And so whatever that crisis is that's happening for their family, we're going to just support them through that crisis period.
I'll tell you, I had no idea when COVID hit because we had moved to Arizona and we had found a caregiver that helped us out. And he would come over to the house and take our son and go do things so that we could go do things. And Arizona was a little bit less buttoned up during COVID. But I had to put a mask on him, even though, I was having a hard time breathing. I had to put a mask on him everywhere I took him in his wheelchair and stuff. But I started talking to my friends. We had a nonprofit for a while where we would help families buy wheelchair accessible vehicles. And I don't understand why there are not more services out there for that, because it is so sad to see families that are isolated. They have a beautiful electric wheelchair that the person can use with a handheld, and they have cars that they can get. If they're a veteran, they get a car. If they're a disabled veteran, the veteran will give them one car in their lifetime. But other people are, even though they have a beautiful wheelchair, they're stuck at home because they have no way of transporting themselves in that wheelchair. But some of the people that we had helped get these cars were telling me their stories of what happened to them during COVID and how services stopped.
Yep.
So these kids who were used to going to programs every day, they all of a sudden they were at home and they were mentally breaking down.
Yes.
And they did not know how to function. And a lot, like you say, not only is there a lot of, you have cerebral palsy and autism and blah, blah, blah. And they would have like 3 or 4 different diagnoses. And so change is not good. And what they were used to, they lost their friends, they lost their routine, they lost the medical help. People couldn't come to the home.
The therapies.
Yes, therapies. It was absolutely tragic. And those of us, especially out here where I live in privileged land, and that were like, well, I'm just going to go play golf. Nobody stopped the golf.
The thing that made me absolutely lose my mind was everybody kept saying, we're all in the same boat. No,
Yeah.
some of you are on a yacht and some of us are in a dinghy or an inflatable raft in the
Yeah.
middle of a typhoon.
With sharks surrounding the raft.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly what I saw. It was really enlightening and it was frightening and it was sad. And we're all paying the price for it as well now.
Mhm.
Kids that are suffering because of COVID and all the restrictions and stuff. But anyway, we could go on for another 4 hours. Anyway,
We could.
yes. Thanks for joining me. And this has been so wonderful. How many episodes are there in season 6? Do you know? Are there 10?
10. So
It's more.
this Tuesday, the last one drops.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so yeah, that's right. We just saw 9. So there's only one
Mhm.
more.
Yep.
So what a phenomenal. We should have a watch party. We should
Okay.
definitely have a watch
Let's
party.
do it.
Oh my gosh. All right. It's planned. It'll be there. You guys need to be there. You people, tell us that you're going to be there. We'll give you times and dates. You can join the watch party. That would be so fun. Thanks for joining me. We will talk again, I'm sure.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Bye-bye. Was that not fun? It really is, people. One of the biggest things that I love about the quote from Mark Twain, where if you want to get rid of racism, travel. And it's so true. If you've lived in other countries, if you've seen what other countries have done, when they felt as though they had an autocratic leader that was getting a little bit too dictatory, they did things about it. That's one area where if you just look at what other countries are doing, and it's the same thing for community services, government services that are paid for, how other governments work. And I mean, everybody always, I get a kick out of these Republicans because they all talk about Norway and Sweden. But then when it says, are we going to do that? They're like, oh no, we're going to do that. No, the government pays for all that. We're going to do it, you know? And so, you know, it's so sad. But if you haven't watched The Handmaid's Tale, and you would like to spend an entire week binge watching, I highly recommend that you do that. I refuse to watch anything that has commercials. So there is a lot of current news that I don't stay up on because I refuse to watch any of the standard shows because I cannot handle a minute of the show and 3 minutes of commercials on my allergy medication or rheumatoid arthritis medication. All right. I can't do it. So it makes me feel bad anyway, because they always classify everybody 65 and above. You might as well be dead. So I don't like to watch commercials, but anyway, so thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible. Remember, if you have someone that is struggling with a fundamental religion, send them this. Share this with them, because if you really love them and you're really concerned about them, you will let them know that they're not alone and that they don't need to jump from Mormonism to an ex-Mormonism community. If that's not comfortable for them, there are other ways that they can find community, and online is a great way to find community. So share this podcast with people that you know that might be physically in, mentally out, or some of the other little acronyms that ex-Mormons have figured out, but who are really struggling with their identity as a woman, what their position is in their life, what their worth is. And especially, Beth, I know you're younger, but so I'm going to address my crowd, okay? If you have a mother who is struggling because she raised her doggone kids, she helped raise half of her grandkids, and she doesn't want to do it anymore. And she doesn't know what to do because she loves the Lord and she wants to stay a good member of the church, but she's losing it. Send her this podcast, share this with her, because she has a right to say, I'm not doing that. It's my turn. It's my turn on earth now. It's my turn to choose who I am and how I spend the third act of my life. And it might be in a paint studio by myself. If that's what she wants to do, let her, Mel Robbins, let her be herself. Let her fulfill some dreams that she had 50 or 60 years ago. It's her turn. So send her this podcast, share this with your friends, and subscribe and like. That is my call to action for you today. So thanks for joining me. We'll see you again next week.